Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to day 2 of GALA Connected Bounce Forward. I hope everyone had a great first day yesterday and you enjoyed the networking just now. Let us know in the chat where you're joining us from today and what was your highlight of day 1. We'd love to hear. There's lots more interesting discussions and networking happening today. And don't forget to visit the booths. There's some cool prizes. And also remember that the lounge is open 24/7 if you want to have a chat with other people at any stage. For today's presentation, a quick reminder to put your questions in the Q&A. And because Aramid allows us to vote on the questions, don't leave them until the end so that everyone has a say. My name is Maria, GALA Board Director. I'm delighted to kick off the first session today to hear about such a key and relevant topic as ethical standards for voice. Our speaker, Valeria Barbero, is an industry veteran. She's currently business director with Mother Tongue in New York, and she has worn many, many hats in the language services industry. She's currently also leading a program on the linguistic and cultural adaptation of voice-first content, thus the topic of her presentation today. Something not many people would know is that Valeria is also an avid and well-seasoned cook, pun intended. And over the years, she has volunteered in many culinary events with hundreds of guests. All the proceeds from those events were donated to different causes, from funding events for the Italian community in the Bay Area, to organizations in support of women's causes, to organizations devoted to improving the quality of school lunches in the US. So an amazing achievement and contribution from Valeria. So Valeria, without further ado, the floor is yours. Feel free to share your screen.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you very much for all your support in this. And yes, as like Maria said, my presentation today is about creating an ethical framework for around voice interactions. Obviously, this is between humans and various devices on what we can loosely call voice assistants. As you might recognize, this is an image from the movie Her. What I really liked about this movie, I think it really asks a very important question, which is what kind of relationship do we want to establish between humans and AI? This is not only an ethical question, obviously it has very important social, economic, and political dimension. But as we go about establishing guidelines, we need to define what are the values and the principles that we want to follow in this relationship, and that is obviously the realm of ethics. So what we'll be discussing today, very, very briefly, is going to be an overview on what I do for voice. We'll look at some data, the characteristics of voice, and then we'll jump into the what it takes to put together an ethical framework for voice. So the program I lead on Mother Tongue involves the localization into more than 30 languages of one of the top voice assistants. And this is the project that really brought me into the fascinating world of voice. For over a year now, I have also volunteered with the Open Voice Network, for which I'm a researcher, an ambassador, and a co-moderator of the Ethical Use Task Force. The Open Voice Network is a nonprofit industry association. We operate as an open source community within the Linux Foundation, but we are independently funded and government. We have people from more than 12 countries around the world, and our work is informed by the principles of interoperability, trust, and inclusivity. We think that these are necessary baselines for the diffusion of technologies that truly contribute to the social and economic development of societies, of groups, and individuals. So what we are trying to do is to really set up guidelines to guide, the relationship between consumers and providers in the realm of voice. So back in 2016, Mary Meekers predicted that voice was going to quickly become the main interface. We are not really there, to be honest. The experience is often still patchy and sometimes unreliable. So we didn't get there as quickly as she predicted, but we are moving quite fast, and this is a very important it's a very important interface at the moment, is growing faster than any other technology. So we need to be very proactive and to have an ethical framework that will ensure that users are protected in this type of interaction. um, what we will be looking in the next three slides is some data. Recently, as Open Voice Network, we partner with the Vixen Labs, and we put together some data. Still, for voice, there aren't too many good studies and consumer analysis that can really tell us how people are using the product across demographic segments, across countries. So this is probably the best one available, and if anyone is interested, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I can share the link to this study. What we looked at is basically the three biggest markets in the Western Hemisphere. Um, what we see in this slide is that voice assistant is becoming more standardized in terms of use. Before, it was still quite niche, but it was also used in a more sporadic way. Right now, it's becoming more standard, and people are using it, more steadily. Um, what we see is that it is growing across all demographic groups and across age groups, and this is important because it's not just something that targets one segment of users, but it's growing across the board. um, the type of interactions, well, is still very transactional and practical, in the sense that people use it to retrieve information, to quickly ask for details about the product or something like that. But you know more complex interactions, like completing a purchase, are still relatively niche, but we are getting there. That is the direction in which it is moving. The roadblocks at this point are still, technology, definitely, but also trust. People are not comfortable enough maybe sharing their details through voice. So that's important. These are roadblocks that will have to be eliminated if for the technology to really spread and eventually entice users to switch from other interfaces to this one. um, what are the characteristics of voice, and why should voice have a strong ethical framework built around it? Well, if we think about what voice brings to the table as type of interface, it has the potential to bring in broader categories. There are entire categories of users that have been underserved until now, and have the potential to start interacting with the digital world out there, with the internet. If we think about the elderly people, that's a category that has grown exponentially during the pandemic. For example, people that with low literacy level, maybe they cannot read and write, or not that well, but they can speak. Children, people with disabilities that could not interact before, but they can use in voice. So, but these are also categories that will need special protection, that are particularly vulnerable. So this really makes for a strong case why voice should have a very strong ethical standard built around it. Voice also, brings in multiple devices and interfaces. We can interact with voice many devices in many environments, and this can pose potential risks. Now, the security of voice is not yet well analyzed and well understood. We don't know what are the potential weaknesses from a security perspective. And on top of this, there is the general direction of where is artificial intelligence going in general, as in terms of its impact on society, on economic development, and on people in general. So all these are factors that that form the corollary in which we need to think about, are really the context for developing ethical standards. The second aspect is what are the characteristics that voice brings in terms of what are we sharing in terms of data when we are interacting through voice. Well, voice is inherently biometric, so what we are sharing when in a voice interaction is definitely identity, like gender, age, also how we are feeling at the moment of the interaction. Are we angry? Are we happy? Um, are we feeling sad? The intention behind the questions that we are asking, the level of trustworthiness that we convey with our voice. We share social attributes, our level of education, status, ethnicity and race, health. Are we in good health? Do we have a cold? Do we have a neurodegenerative disease? And sometimes, even before we actually know that, we share things about our characteristic, the body mass, the location, in which kind of environment we are as we're speaking. So all of this, there's a wealth of information that gets shared, and companies can bank on it. They can, store it, use it, and even sell it. And this poses a privacy risk, a security risk for people that are not necessarily conscious of this aspect. Most people do not know the amount of information that they are sharing in a voice interaction. So there is a lot of work to be done there in terms of educating the public. And one example right now, I've started seeing that people do share voice resumes. So imagine the potential for bias there, right? You could without knowing, you could share information that you really do not want a prospective employer to know about you. So that's why this really has to be thought through very, very carefully, and not just at the company level. I mean, we do need a broader legal framework. Another aspect of voice is that, in terms of legal framework, is really not well covered, in the sense that if I ask the question, who owns my voice, the response is, well, it depends. I mean, if you are a famous artist, a famous singer, a famous actor, then you do obviously have copyrights. But if you're just a regular Joe, who owns your voice is not that clear. There were two news recently. One was about Anthony Bourdain's documentary, where his voice was digitized and used, and he clearly had no saying in it, since he had already passed away. At the same time, Val Kilmer's voice was developed synthetically using AI, and as he lost his natural voice to cancer. Um, so what this brings up is really the potential for a lot of good, but also the potential for misuse of this technology, and that's another factor that we need to keep in mind when we think about ethical use. What about the users? We often hear the argument that, like, oh, I don't care what companies do with my data, I've got nothing to hide. In voice is not really like that. People are concerned, and voice and trust is likely to be a big factor. So is even if companies are not necessarily sold on the ethical argument, it is going to impair the further diffusion of this technology. So it is important that they provide, they reassure users about how their data is handled. Otherwise, it will slow down the development. So what we are looking, given all of this, what we are looking at with the Open Voice Network is really to focus on the ethics of inclusivity and ethics of trust. These are two main principles that are emerging as the driving principles in our guidelines. The ethics of inclusivity, as we have seen, voice really has the potential to be way more inclusive than other previous interfaces. So this is something that companies should ideally internalize and make sure that they address inclusivity at every step, from when they start gathering the data until the release of the product. They have to make sure that there is no bias, that the data is inclusive, and then they have to carry this through at the level, how when they build the persona of the assistant, the type of content they plan, and then the devices, if there's devices, are people elderly, for example, can they easily interact with it? um, by ethics of trust, we really mean a framework that companies should adopt and think about trust, not just because they have to do it, but ideally we would want to see that companies are very proactive. They acknowledge the very sensitive nature of voice, and the type of data that gets shared during the voice interaction. Recognize this and be very proactive. The legislation, like we have seen, is still kind of patchy, but they can be proactive, and they can rely on a lot of other legislation, like the GDPR, the California Consumer Act, that addresses issues of privacy and adapt them to voice. Be very open and transparent about their data governance practices. Be transparent about how they store, how they use the data, and just make it easy for users to ask for their data to be deleted if that's what the user wants. Sustainability is another big issue with AI projects, and companies should be open about that. What is the environmental footprint of their project and programs? Compliance is still a problem. Like we've said, there are broader legislative framework, but companies can get away with a lot because, for example, in the United States, there are 5 states that have comprehensive privacy legislations, but it's just 5 of them. And at the federal level, there hasn't been an effort to put together an overall framework. So companies could get away with, providing users with different type of service depending where the users are located. But if companies are proactive, and if they really invest in a relationship of trust with the users, then they can rely on other frameworks. A lot of companies have released ethical frameworks for AI, from Deloitte to Microsoft, Google, Capgemini. There are in academia, there are many researchers that they have created independent framework that can be used and implemented. There are independent artificial intelligence institutes like the Responsible AI Institute that has partnered with the World Economic Forum. So there are really a lot of sources. As Open Voice Network, we are planning to release our guidelines sometimes next year, and we are planning to issue badges and certificates for companies that will implement our
Sorry, Valeria.
ethical.
There's a little bit of background noise. It was it was quite, yeah, it was quite loud. Just there, yeah.
Oh,
Sorry,
oh,
sorry
I'm
for
sorry.
disturbing. No, no problem. Go ahead, continue.
Sorry, we're good. Okay. So, last but not least, I just wanted to briefly touch on what can LSP do in these scenarios. Well, I think that what if there is something that we really know, is to how to educate the different stakeholders, and we have done very well in that, and we can continue to do so. We can make sure that we ourselves are well aware of what the ethical standards are. We have to become champions for inclusivity, and bring this up with our clients, flag things. For example, many LSPs right now are getting into the data collection business, and we can flag these things to the clients. Sometimes they just don't know, but if we flag things, if we bring this up, then they are in a better position to make decisions. And if they really want to be inclusive, then they have the opportunity to do so. We can bring data and knowledge about countries, cultures, languages, dialects, accent, all the wealth of variety that we know so well. All of that can be shared with the client so that they can make better decisions. Sorry, I went slightly over time, but I'd love to answer any questions now. I'll stop presenting.
Thank you, Valeria. Thank you very, very much. And you are absolutely right on time. So thank you for that. Um, I have been fascinated about this topic ever since we started talking about it. And I think the biometric data that is contained within voice just is kind of is mind blowing, and is something that certainly the public, and I include myself, will need more education on for sure, and just the implications in general of who owns my voice for sure. But just before we move to Q&A, we're going to get Pete, our virtual artist, to share with us the work that he has been diligently completing, the illustration that summarizes this fascinating presentation from Valeria. So, Pete, thank you. Great. Thank you very much.
It's
Excellent.
fantastic.
It is absolutely fantastic. And I think a fantastic sort of takeaway, also to kind of present to others and summarize what this very important topic is all about. Great. Thank you, Pete. Thank you. Very good. Okay, so we move swiftly to Q&A. We have a question there. Thank you. Alison is raising a very valid question around which are the right stakeholders to address the standards around the ethical use of our voice data, who will make the rules, and are they the right people to do so? So would love your thoughts on that, Valeria.
Well, I mean, ideally, we would like to see a broad legal framework, and obviously, that is at the state level. But as we have seen, not just with voice, That happens very slowly, unfortunately. Technology is moving too fast, and legislative bodies are very slow, and they often also don't have the technical backgrounds to fully grasp what is going on. So many companies are relying on experts, on academia, just to make up for the missing link with the state at the moment. It took years to release the GDPR. Voice is going to be even more challenging because the technology is changing as we speak. So it's like, aiming at a moving target. It's not easy. The committee that came up with the GDPR issued a special recommendation around voice, but even they are struggling with keeping up with the technology. So it's not easy. I That's why we think that ensuring an ethics of trust is the first step as we wait for broader frameworks to be able to not only put this together but also to enforce it.
Excellent. And I want to ask a follow-up question just on that. In addition to obviously the experts, and I know we have another question on the screen that we'll touch on, are there other challenges um, for the implementation of this type of ethical framework, in your opinion?
The standards are very different. So, for example, the GDPR is really focused on privacy, but as we have seen with voice, there's a lot more going on. It's not just a matter of being able to identify someone through personal data, right? It's not just a matter of being identified. I mean, potentially there is a huge potential for bias if companies decide to use the data. And we are looking at a world where we often are the products, and we are being targeted in very personalized ways. So all of that has to be kept in mind when these kind of frameworks are implemented. And of course, companies exist. They make profit. That's their business. But we need to create the right incentives so that they still make profit, but they do so in an ethical way, in a way that protects the users, not just uses the user.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good. When one last question, and I know we're going to be closing off the session very soon, is what are people concerned about when it comes to privacy and the use of voice activated devices?
There isn't too much education out there in the sense that most of the time people don't really realize how much data they are given away when in a voice interaction. But most of them are concerned about sharing information that is either personal, or they are uncomfortable, for example, sharing their credit card details to complete a purchase, or they are concerned if, for example, they don't understand how the entire purchase is completed. I mean, how does that happen in the background? So
Of course.
there are different layers of concern. But of course, for privacy is what we all are concerned in any type of interaction. It's like, how are they going to use my data? Are they going to share it with third parties? Are they going to sell it? um, can I be identified in any possible way? Is there potential for discrimination? So
Of course.
these are still real concern
Yes. And I
from
think
people.
we'll we'll have plenty of opportunities to continue the discussion in the lounge at any stage,
Yes,
networking or off
absolutely. I'll
off
be there.
topic. And I know, Valeria, you're going to be around as well to continue the conversation with people. So thanks again to everybody for joining. Thank you, Valeria, so much for a super interesting and insightful session. We're off to the next session, an industry quiz sponsored by Vistatech. So see you all there.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.